All right. Well, it is officially noon, so I'll go ahead and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. We're back for another Wednesday webinar. My name's Elena Whitaker, and I'm a water and conservation educator with Iowa Learning Farms. Today, we're joined by Dr. Mark Licht. He's going to talk about the agronomics of relay intercropping. Mark is an associate professor here at Iowa State and also an extension cropping systems specialist. So, talking all things relay intercropping. If you have any questions at all throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to them after Mark is done talking. Otherwise, Mark, the floor is all yours. So take it away.
Well, thank you, Elena. I'm going to start out giving some props or shout outs to other people because while yes, I'm talking about the agronomics, and that was the part of this project that I was most involved in. There's other people that have been involved in various parts of this, and a large part of this presentation was actually built by Liz Ripley, and Matt Helmers has some things in it. But Elena, Mitch, Jackie, Ann all have various fingers into this project, and so want to give kind of a broader props to this intercropping project that we have going on. And the other thing I want to do before I really get into some more of the data slides is I just wanted to provide some context as to what relay intercropping really is. And so what we're really focusing on here is that we're essentially getting 3 harvestable crops in a 2-year time period. And so, kind of the way that looks is, after corn harvest, we'd go ahead and we'd plant winter wheat, winter rye, something like that in the fall. It would overwinter, start growing in the spring. In that April to very, very early May timeframe, we'd plant soybeans. Then we'd harvest the winter wheat, winter rye the last week of June, first week of July. Go in, harvest the soybeans at the end of the year, late September, October. And then ideally, maybe plant like an oat cover crop that would winter kill before we go back and start that system or that cycle over again with corn planting the following spring. So that's kind of what the sequence really looks like. And again, the intent here is in some respects maybe intensification of our cropping system, but it's more in a sustainable way because we've got that winter wheat, that winter rye that is essentially acting as a cover crop in the late fall and in the early spring. It's actively growing at a time of year when maybe a corn soybean rotation just doesn't have that active growth happening. So I'm going to jump kind of right into some of the data, and part of this project here, we worked with some variety trials, and so I'm going to show you 2 different sets of variety trials. The first set is a cereal rye variety trial. This was really coordinated through the Practical Farmers of Iowa. And then it was conducted at several Iowa State University research farms. So that QR code should take you to the full set of trial results. I'm showing kind of a summary of the data from Nashua and Kanawha through the years. And I've averaged the open pollinated and the hybrid cereal rye varieties within each of those crop years. And so the main thing I wanted to show here, well, 2 main things. There's a lot of variation in yields from one year to the next or one location to the next. And so you can really start to hone in on that. There's obviously some very good production years, and there's some really rough production years. And then the other thing is right along the bottom line here, where you can see the average difference between the open pollinated and the hybrid rye. And really what that amounts to is that we're getting essentially a 20 to 30 bushel per acre bump using that hybrid rye. Okay, so just a quick summary of what those cereal rye variety trial looks like. Oh, before I go on, there's one other thing that I wanted to point out. So this was the standard kind of Practical Farmers of Iowa setup. We did add in a variety not stated in 2024 and 2025. And that variety not stated basically was derived from a Hazlitt variety many years back or several years back. And one of the things, while I don't have necessarily the data on this slide, one of the things that we learned was that variety not stated, even though it was derived from Hazlitt, it was yielding less than that Hazlitt open pollinated variety was yielding. And it could have been, a bushel less all the way up to 30 to 40 bushels less, depending on the year. And so when we think about variety not stated, we can get some good benefits out of it from a soil health and active plant root growth perspective. But from a yield perspective, we start to lose that yield potential the more uh, distance or more time frame away from when it was a stated variety. So moving on, the winter wheat variety trial results. These were just done at Kanawha and Nashua, specific to this particular project. And we only chose these two northern locations largely because we have a pretty good understanding that we can grow winter wheat fairly reliably in the southern part of the state, but wanted to kind of see what yield potential looked like as we move to the northern part of the state. And so we did this in 2024 and 2025 in Kanawha, Iowa, north central, and then over by Nashua, which is in northeast Iowa. Again, very similar to the cereal rye yields in that there's a lot of variation from one year to the next and one location to the next. And so there's just, I'll say, a little bit more risk with these small grains. And it's all going to be kind of that weather dependent, management dependent, and the types of the soils that we're working with. I would say, generally speaking, that the winter wheat is a little bit higher yielding than that cereal rye would be. And we see that really as we compared and looked at the 2024 results from the two different variety trials. Moving on, now I'm going to jump into the agronomic trials that we were working with. And here we are focused on cereal rye with soybeans interseeded into it. And so I'm going to break this down into kind of the cereal rye management and the soybean management. But keep in mind, in both situations, we have the relay crop system in place. And so while I may only be focused on the cereal rye side, know that there are soybeans grown into it. And same thing with the soybean management side, know that those soybeans are being grown with that cereal rye. So I'm going to start here with the cereal rye side. And just to kind of explain what we've got going, because you'll see these same similar slides for the next couple here. As we look at this on the x-axis here, C24, N24, C25. This just refers to C as in Crawfordsville, N's Nashua, and then the 24 or 25 is the harvested crop year. Okay. And then I do try to put the legend down at the bottom so you know what the treatment comparisons really are here. And so in this situation here, we've got Receptor, which is a hybrid rye, and Danko, which is an open pollinated cereal rye. And you can see that in 2024 at both Crawfordsville and Nashua, that hybrid rye really does hold up and matches what we found in the variety trials, where it is considerably higher yielding, even in the relay intercrop system. Now, down in Crawfordsville in 2025, we did not see any differences there. Not quite sure why those differences didn't show up, or at least didn't show up statistically. The other thing I should note is that on the cereal rye side for Nashua 2025, we did have the trial occur that year, but I pulled out the cereal rye yield information on here because our yield levels were really low, like 5 to 10 bushels per acre low. A couple of reasons for that is we had really poor establishment in the fall of 2024. It was just really dry, specifically at the Nashua location. And then in the spring of 2025, we had really excessive rainfall, and the two things in combination really penalized our cereal rye yields in Nashua in 2025. So then the next comparison that we have is looking at an early October versus a late October planting date of that cereal rye. And here, the two Crawfordsville years in 24 and 25, that early October planting date was higher yielding than the late October planting date. Okay. Nashua 2024, there was really no difference between it. I think why we see this early October versus late October working well or performing better in Crawfordsville is simply that we have a little bit longer growing season. And so in early October, we can get germination and emergence, and we can get some tillering happening in that cereal rye just because we hit low temperatures that would send it into dormancy a little bit later in Crawfordsville than maybe we do up in Nashua. And so that's the large difference there. And then we also had different seeding rates. And so thinking of it in a pounds per acre perspective, we had 25, 50, and 75 pounds per acre. This equates to 500,000, 1,000,000, and 1.5 million seeds per acre in kind of rough numbers, anyhow. Um, as we look at those results, in 2024, both locations, we did not have statistically significant differences showing up. We did have some significance showing up in Crawfordsville in 2025, and that's where we did have higher yields at the 75 bushel per acre compared to the 25 bushel per acre, but 50 bushels per acre was statistically similar to both the higher and the lower seeding rates. And so we can see a little bit of differences occurring there. Now, I'm showing you really kind of the main effects here, but we did have um, a full complete block design where we do have some interaction effects that did occur. And so one of the ones that I want to really point out is that in the early October planting dates, this is where we can get by with a slightly lower seeding rates, simply because there's an interaction effect between that planting date and seeding rate. And so the earlier we get it planted, the more tillering we have, which resulted in less response on the seeding rate side. So we can get by with early seeding and lower seeding rates, whereas when we're in late seeding dates or planting dates, then we need to have slightly higher seeding rates. Jumping onto the soybean management side of things, here I do include the Nashua 2025 soybean yields, but you'll notice that as we go through this, while yes, the soybeans were growing in cereal rye, they also maybe didn't have quite as much competition occurring. But I thought it was a good comparison to kind of show you how there is some competition effect that does come into play here and can impact our soybean yields. So this first comparison that I have is kind of bushy versus upright plant architecture. So it's that the soybean genotype really that we're working with. And in this situation, we did not find any differences between the bushy versus the upright plants. Now, that's from a yield perspective. There is some evidence, and I've seen it just a little bit in this trial, but I've seen it in some other non-relay cropping trials where I've had bushy versus upright, where those upright varieties tend to be just a little bit taller than the bushy varieties. And that can come into play when we think about harvesting that cereal rye or the winter wheat with those soybeans. The taller stature could lead to clipping some of those soybeans at the apical meristem or the top part of the canopy, Whereas with the wheat, if we kind of raise up that head a little bit, or the rye, if we raise up that head a little bit, now we may not be getting a full wheat harvest or a full harvest of the cereal rye seed heads. And so there may be reasons why to still use a bushy, even though it's not necessarily affecting our yield potential. Now, the next one I'm highlighting or showing on here is kind of a normal maturity group and a later maturity group. And so that normal maturity group, I kind of classified them that way simply because we're using a early group 3, generally speaking, down at Crawfordsville, whereas we might be at an early to mid group 2 up at Nashua. Okay, and so that's kind of where our normal maturity group is. And then the later maturity group, what we did there is we increased the maturity by half to a full maturity group, depending on what we could find as far as comparable soybean varieties with that plant architecture. And one of the things that we do find here, and we see it in Crawfordsville in both years and Nashua in 2024, is that that later maturity group does give us a much higher yield potential. In Nashua in 2025, we didn't see it, but again, remember, we didn't have the cereal rye competition that we did at the other site years. One of the reasons why we think that this later maturity group is a little bit higher yielding is because we're really extending our seed fill period, hoping that we can get a late August, early September rain that can then again help us fill out a few more seeds and increase that seed weight a little bit. And then the last soybean management comparison that I have here is looking at our seeding rates, and so 90,000, 120,000, and 150,000 seeds per acre. In all years, we did have a significant difference where 120,000 was greater than the 90,000 seeding rate. And then we do have in 2025 at Crawfordsville here, you can kind of see that 120,000 was higher than both the 90 and the 150,000 seeds per acre. And so this just goes to show a little bit that the Iowa State recommendation for sole crop soybeans is right around 120,000 up to 140,000. And I think what this data would maybe indicate is in relay intercropping, we may be able to back off a little bit and be on the lower end of that seeding rate recommendation. And then that helps us balance a little bit the management for both the rye benefit and the soybean benefit, right? So that's one of the things that we've seen there. There was a minor interaction between maturity group and seeding rate, and I don't show the data here. But one of the things that we tend to see here is that later maturity group will lessen that seeding rate response. And so that's where we maybe didn't have as much of a seeding rate response, whereas in the normal maturity group, that seeding rate response was a little bit stronger. Okay, and there's another component of this that I just want to touch on because we can do these trials at university farms, but I wanted to swap over and kind of show some of the things that we saw as far as yield levels in the on-farm trials that we had. And so this work here was really through a great partnership with Iowa Soybean Association, Northeast Iowa Resource Conservation District, and then one of our extension field agronomists that help manage these locations. So I'm just showing the 2024 yields. The 2025 yields we can talk about maybe later, but what we really found in 2025 was we had a really hard time harvesting the cereal rye, and that was simply because we had lodging at several of the locations in 2025. And so I'm not showing 2025 yields, just the 2024s. And really what you see is quite a bit of variation, right? And just to maybe highlight this a little bit and provide some orientation, the blue bars are our average sole crop soybean yields. The orange bars are the average relay crop soybean yields. And then the gray bars are the average cereal rye yields in the relay crop system. Okay. And I'm pointing over here at the Northwood location because this is where we did have a pretty big extreme, from the sole crop soybeans down to the relay crop soybeans, right? A pretty big difference that occurred there. You see it over at Coggin and Elma as well. A little less at Oskaloosa, right? But what you also see is that where we had more impact on our soybean yields, we had fairly high yield levels on our cereal rye. And so, again, there's a balancing effect that has to go here. If we really get high cereal rye yields, it's probably going to penalize our soybean yields. The other thing that I wanted to kind of note, and you kind of see the opposite over here with Monticello, where really we had no impact on our soybean yields, but our cereal rye yields were down. That was where we had our lowest cereal rye yields, right? And so part of this difference with Northwood and Monticello is really the weather that we had. Down in Monticello, the cereal rye during that main growing period in May, we had some higher precipitation levels. The cereal rye did not do as well there, but that did allow plenty of moisture for the soybean crop. Plus, we had a little bit more rainfall in July down in Monticello. So the soybeans benefited from the, well, lower productivity on the cereal rye, but also the rainfall that we got during July down there. Whereas up at Northwood, we didn't have quite as much rainfall in the April-May timeframe, but we also didn't have rainfall in July. And so, again, a combination of factors that maybe penalize the soybeans a little bit more so. Just to maybe show a little bit, and Liz Ripley did the majority of the work on this, where she did some economic analysis after talking with the farmers about cost of production, and then using some commodity prices, at the time of harvest type thing. One thing to note: the market price for the cereal rye was based on uncleaned rye seed at about $8 per bushel. The main takeaway here is that in three of our locations, Northwood, Cogan, and Elma, basically that relay crop system came at a large profit penalty, right? Over at Oskaloosa, it was essentially a break even. And then at Fort Atkinson and Monticello, the relay crop system performed better than the sole crop soybean system. And so a lot of variability. And again, it's how are we managing the systems and where do yield levels really fall out here. But a fair amount of risk that we have to be considering. There's a lot of management that goes into a relay crop system. So how we manage that risk is going to start to affect this economic analysis as well. Okay, so just a real quick summary here to start wrapping up. So on the cereal rye side, we definitely in a relay crop system want to avoid the variety not stated cereal rye. And this is largely due to it's not a pure variety anymore, and so we do get quite a bit of variability on the plant height and even the quality of the seed at times. We would only want to consider hybrid rye if we have a profitable market that maybe could offset that higher seed cost. And my guess is in a lot of the relay crop systems, we're probably not going to be there. Although there might be a few instances where that could happen. Definitely wanting to get this planted in the fall prior to October 15th. And maybe even in the northern Iowa areas, we may even want to bump that up to the 1st of October. Targeting 1.5 million seeds per acre, especially when we're getting very timely planting. If we get into planting after October 15th, that's when maybe we want to think about bumping it up to 1.5 million seeds per acre. And then another management, while we didn't necessarily test this Just talking with farmers that have been doing some relay intercropping and trying to balance our soybean, management with our cereal rye management, we might want to consider using like a skip row or strip tillage in the fall or when we're seeding that cereal rye or winter wheat as an opportunity to provide a clear row zone for those soybeans to grow in, and that can maybe reduce a little bit of competition on the soybeans. On the soybean side of things, again, we know that the plant architecture didn't necessarily have an impact on yields. Where we might see some influences if those upright or tall varieties start to interfere with the small grain harvest. And so that might be the caveat to throw in with this one. We want to make sure that we get the soybeans planted before that small grain starts jointing. So typically that's going to be kind of that mid to late April timeframe. Once we get into May, the small grains start jointing, and planting of the soybeans will give us some uneven plant height on that small grain. And again, then that just complicates the harvest of the small grain without damaging the soybeans there. Definitely want to consider planting a half maturity to a full maturity group later on the soybeans. And then sticking within the ISU recommend seeding rate of 120 to 140,000 seeds per acre. Although we probably can, nudge down a little bit closer to that 120,000 seeding rate range. And then the last one, again, one that we didn't necessarily test, but making sure that we have plenty of fertility out there for the soybean crop. This is really a concern of mine, especially if we're pushing our corn yields higher than maybe we have fertilized for, but then also recognizing that the winter wheat, the cereal rye, we're going to harvest that, and that's going to remove nutrients from the field as well. And so just wanting to make sure that we have plenty of phosphorus and potassium in particular, and then make sure that we maybe or at least giving a nod to whether we would see a benefit from having sulfur applied out there for that soybean crop as well. So just recognize that in this system, it's a little bit more complex. We're taking off a little bit more grain before those soybeans would, be in that seed fill period, and so we just want to make sure that we don't harm that soybean productivity just from a fertility standpoint. And then just overall, a couple quick recommendations that maybe come along with this. Start small. This is a much more complicated system to manage. And so starting with, less than 20 acres is a decent way to go just to get familiar with it. And then you can grow into it as you have more familiarity. Minimizing tire traffic. Anytime we have to run over that small grain, early in the year, it will try to bounce back a little bit, but it's still, those tire tracks are still going to have an impact on the height of the small grain crop, and it can also have some impacts on the soybean crop. And so that might be a situation where if you're going in with, some sort of a pesticide, these are acres where a drone application may be beneficial just because it reduces that tire traffic altogether. With the small grain, we may want to consider a fungicide, especially if we want to use that small grain harvested seed for, a cover crop seed or for planting in another situation, right? And so making sure that we have that. If we want to feed it, now this gets a little bit trickier because we can get fusarium head blights or ergot that can actually have an impact on that livestock that we may be mixing it into the ration for. And so either testing the grain after harvest or making sure that we kind of consider that fungicide application to reduce any impacts there. And then lastly, these small grains, we have to treat them as a cash crop, right? And not a cover crop. And so we do need to apply some nitrogen. For cereal rye, that might be 30 to 50 pounds of nitrogen. For winter wheat, that might be a little bit higher. We might be able to go 60 up to 75 pounds of nitrogen per acre there. And so just recognize that we do need to apply nitrogen for the cereal rye or the winter wheat production there. Okay, so I do want to again give some props here because the Iowa Learning Farms team has definitely been instrumental in this project. They've done some various things with the farmer partner sites, but then there's been a social science component and everything too. You can find all this information on the web page listed on the right hand of the slide there, or by clicking on that QR code. Again, we had help from various people in extension and outreach here at Iowa State, along with Iowa Soybean Association and Northeast Iowa RC&D. And then again, the on-farm component is not possible without those six farmer partners that are doing these demonstrations. And so we definitely have to give props to them. And then the last note there is that this has been funded through the USDA NRCS as a conservation innovation grant. And we are wrapping up the last summer of those on-farm trials. And then Matt Helmers also has another year going on up at his Gilmore City tile drainage site. And so we'll be wrapping that up and then pulling all that together as we start drawing conclusions from this project. So with that, Elena, I'm going to turn it over to you for some of these wrap-up slides with Iowa Learning Farms.
Perfect. And yes, people, we've got a bunch of questions already in the chat, but if you have more, keep putting them in. We'll try to get to all of them. But otherwise, some key partners for our webinars include the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, the Iowa Nutrient Research Center, and the Leopold Center for Sustainable Ag. So those are some of our key partners for making sure that these webinars happen every week. Next slide. If you're watching today to earn a CCA CEU, go ahead and email me at alenaw@iastate.edu, so Elena W, by 5 o'clock today. Include your name in the email, the name you entered to watch the webinar if it's different from your Zoom username, and then your CCA number. And I can get those submitted to the CCA board by the end of the week if you email me 5 o'clock today. If you are tuning in and if you would like to fill out our voluntary demographic survey, we only need one response for all of 2026. So if you've already filled it out at some point earlier this year, good to go. Otherwise, it should only take you a couple minutes if you'd like to fill it out. And then next week, we are joined by Haiwan Lee and Siwoo Lee. One is a PhD candidate here at Iowa State. Another is at Rutgers. She is an assistant professor and extension specialist in farm viability. And they're going to be talking about when does scouting pay and evaluating soybean aphid scouting and drones. So that should be an interesting topic that we've got coming up next week. And then I've got one more here. You can find today and all of our previous webinars in the Iowa Learning Farms webinar archive. So you can find it on our website, iowalearningfarms.org/webinars, or our YouTube channel. Things are sorted by year and by topic. So we have a playlist that is titled Relay Intercropping. So you can find the few other webinars we've done about relay intercropping, just like you can find some that we've done all about wetlands or nitrogen fertility, things like that. Otherwise, let's get to some of the questions we have. So, one was asking, and you mentioned this a little bit back on your cereal rye slides, but they were wanting to know planting rate. So you had the one graph showing like the different planting rates of the cereal rye, of the different seeding rates. And you mentioned a little bit how it affected the early and the late, but so at all the locations, did you run trials with all of those different seeding rates and then kind of average them for some of your other numbers and results?
Sure. So I think this is the
Yes,
one of
this
the
one.
slides. So on the cereal rye management, we did have the seeding rates in a randomized complete block design with the planting date and the hybrid type or cereal rye type, right? On the soybean side, when I had these slides here, These just used the million seeds per acre seeding rate on the cereal rye. So
Okay.
a way that we had to kind of we kind of had to separate things out a little bit because we knew that at least in our research plots, like on the soybean management, we knew that we were going to be running over the rye a little bit more than a farmer might, and so we kind of had those as a set of trials. And then the cereal rye, again, we knew we were going to be running over the soybeans as we harvested rye and whatnot, just because of our plot equipment, right? And so we kind of viewed these as, kind of the cereal rye and the soybean management as two separate trials within the two locations.
Okay. We've had a couple questions about tillage. So some of the questions were, um, the cereal rye, was it no-till drilled into the corn stalks?
Yes,
Okay.
that's a good distinction. So yes, we did no-till drill the rye into the corn stalks, and we no-tilled obviously those soybeans into the cereal rye, right? And the thought process behind that was that really we wanted to be able to get that rye planted relatively early, and we know that cereal rye, um, well, or wheat, really they can come up through that residue from the corn fairly easily, and so just it was a timing thing that we were working after.
hmm Okay. And so yeah, and you'd said in your recommendations of maybe in the future to do a skip row or a strip till for the soybeans. At least, yeah, that's what some of
Mhm.
our farmer partners have uh recommended. You'd also mentioned applying nitrogen for the small grain crop. When should people be doing that?
Yeah, so the timing on that, well, there's various recommendations that come out, and these recommendations that I've looked into really are based off of a what I would call the sole crop rye or sole crop wheat. I don't know of anyone that's done relay crop trials with the nitrogen rates. And so what we typically find is that a couple of them do recommend a very low rate, maybe in the fall. But most are recommending those nitrogen applications to be made in the spring of the year. Typically, once we've got a little bit of green up and a little bit of growth occurring, but definitely before we would get to the jointing stage. And so the timing for Iowa is typically going to be in that early to mid-April timeframe.
Okay. Um, One person is asking for the final stand pops of soybeans. Like, what were they?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't remember off the top of my head
Okay.
what they were in these trials, but we would be targeting 100,000 at the end of the year still. And well, I have another set of trials where we've been looking at soybean seeding rates and final populations. Um, I'm honestly not concerned if I have final populations down to like 85 or 90,000 seeds per acre, or not seeds, 85 to 90,000 plants per acre at the end of the year. We were still getting, that very high yield potential in sole crop soybeans, and I think it'd be something very similar here in a relay crop system.
I have one person just asked about crop insurance and relay intercropping. Can they still insure their soybeans? And the answer is yes. We've had a previous webinar about it, so I'm going to put that link in the chat now for people. But we had some people, oh, it's a very long link. Um, we had some people from Farmers Mutual Hail, though. They came and talked about how to crop insurance for relay and double cropping. So people can watch that. I apologize for how long this link is. I don't know why it's that long, but it is in the chat to watch that webinar at any point if people are interested. Some other questions we got asked, and we're still definitely collecting data on this, but can you talk about water quality benefits of intercropping, and how good of a best management practice is it for nutrient reductions?
So that's a really good question. Matt Helmers is doing this work with the tile drainage plots, and so it's too bad that he wasn't hosting today just from that perspective. Elena, you're doing a great job though,
Thank you.
because he knows that data set better. as I recall, it does do a pretty good job from a water quality perspective. Again, because we've got that small grain growing in the fall, we've carried it in and it's growing actively in the spring, and so it may not be the same, so to speak, as a cover crop system, but it's going to be pretty similar just because we're getting that active growth in a time frame when we don't normally have it with corn and soybeans.
Another person is talking about when you were showing the different field sites and their yields and things like that for the farmers, that the Fort Atkinson site might be rated as less suitable for soybeans just because it had the lowest yield out of all those 6 sites for even sole soybeans in 2024. But that the Fort Atkinson site looked like it could be a place where intercropping would add the most value. So would you say that lower yield soybean fields are the best candidates for relay intercropping in terms of increased farm revenue?
Oh, that's a good question. And I guess I don't know how to, I'd have to look at more locations than just the one, I guess, right? The part of this could be, yes, it's not as, so to speak, well suited for soybean production, and that's a good area for it. But we also know that, cereal rye, winter wheat, these small grains tend to do a little bit better when we have we have drier conditions, right? And that's why we tend to see yeah, a lot of the small grains being grown out in the Great Plains states, right? Um, Although there are instances, and we do get a fair amount of cereal grains that get grown out in Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio, and Pennsylvania too, right? So, and those areas maybe would not be as high on the corn and soybean yield productivity. So that may be something that we should look into and basically confirm that. But I can't say that for sure right now.
Okay. We have at least 3 people asking about herbicides and pesticides. So, what was used for herbicides and pesticides? And within that, people are asking, did they need less in the relay intercropping field, or predicting, or are we foreseeing that we're going to need less in the relay intercropping for those herbicides and pesticides?
So I know for sure in our agronomic trials that we had up at Nashua and Crawfordsville, we did not put down any herbicides in the spring of the year. So while there was basically a grass and a broadleaf growing together, there's relatively few herbicides that we could rely on. If you knew that you had some early flush of broadleaf weeds, you very easily could go out and apply a herbicide before planting those soybeans, right? Into that cereal rye or the winter wheat. You could manage it that way. Um, but in our situation, we didn't have any really any need to do that ahead of the soybean planting. One of the things that we did do and we did find was that after we harvested off that small grain, at least in the agronomic trials that we had, we did need to go in with some post applications to control. Really, it was the late season water hemp that was coming through, just because those soybeans, again, they really haven't closed canopy yet, and so it's going to take them a little bit of time. And then if you time it right, you'll also then be burning down some of the volunteer wheat or cereal rye that would come up. And so there is a need to kind of come in after that small grain is harvested off for herbicide, control, making sure that we can keep those fields clean still.
They're asking another question is, would it work on like with a small grain on 30 row centers?
Yeah, so these soybeans were planted on 30-inch rows. The in our situation, the wheat, or excuse me, the rye was planted on 10-inch spacings, and so we did not. Again, we didn't do the skip row, we didn't do the strip tillage with it, right? So we were planting the soybeans in 30-inch rows, and we tried to split, as best we could. We tried to split those 10-inch drill rows.
one person is asking, we talked about this a little bit already, but like in the future to maybe do some strip tillage or skip row, what are some of the benefits of skip row?
Yeah, so skip row or even strip tillage, what is really, allowing is a wider row zone for the soybeans to get planted into. A couple benefits there, right? On a soybean planter, you have the down pressure gauge wheels, depth gauge wheels, right? And in if you don't have that row zone, those will run over some wheat or rye, right? And so you could have some, so to speak, wheel traffic damage on the small grain. But I think really the benefit is that now you've kind of opened up the small grain a little bit. So those soybeans can grow. The hope is that they don't elongate or exfoliate the nodes between or the internodal space between those nodes, right? So it keeps the soybeans maybe a little bit smaller. And then we just reduce a little bit of competition for soil moisture, get a little bit more sunlight down into that soybean crop.
Okay, we got some questions about small grains besides cereal rye. So one person is asking, um, why are the seeding rates for cereal rye so high? Because they've seen some farmers have success with relay intercropping with wheat, and their wheat seeding rate was under 500,000.
That's a good question, and I think part of that is just balancing some things out. So when you think of wheat, and even the recommendations on cereal rye for them as a sole cash crop, we would typically be looking at 1 million to 1.5 million seeds per acre. Um, I think, we can potentially lower those down, and that's why we were kind of looking at it as well. By lowering it down, we're again reducing some competition in that relay crop system, right? So fewer seeds per acre. Yes, they're going to tiller a little bit more in the fall, and each tiller is seed head and so to speak grain production, right? And so we can lower it down. We may get a little bit more tillering out of those seeding rates then. But yeah, where how low can we go is a very good question. And then again, it's a balancing act, right? If we manage for high yields on the small grains, that's going to come at a penalty of the soybeans and vice versa.
Another person is asking, uh, so obviously we only have results for a little bit of wheat results and a little bit of cereal rye results, but they're asking if we've tried this with barley, because barley has a shorter maturity, so harvest would be earlier, but then also they're recognizing that barley does have a shorter stature usually than cereal rye. So just wondering any interest in barley maybe, and then like pros and cons.
I've not heard of anyone doing it with barley, and I think part of it is that shorter stature. Um, if you think of barley, wheat, cereal rye as far as stature. The barley is going to be the shortest. Then you're going to have wheat. Then you're going to have cereal rye being the tallest of those three. Oats is probably, I'll say, right around wheat, up maybe into the height of some of the shorter cereal rye varieties, right? And so the issue is, yes, barley tends to mature a little bit earlier than the other species, but it's lower. And my concern there is just where those seed heads are compared to where the soybean height would be. And I think, and that's one of the things that we found, yeah, and talking with our farmer partners, there's hesitation with wheat because wheat tends to be short. And by the time you're harvesting wheat, the last week of June to the first week of July, you very well could have soybeans, in that soybean canopy at the same height as the wheat. Cereal rye tends to be a little bit taller, especially if you give it too much nitrogen, it'll get really tall. But that also makes it a little bit easier to harvest the cereal rye over the soybean canopy as it develops.
A person is asking, how does relay intercropping influence soil fertility and organic matter, especially over the long term?
That's a good question. We might be able to piece that together after, well, and I didn't talk about it in the presentation, but we do have several of these locations where the relay crop system was in the first year and now in the third year of the project. And so in those locations, we are taking some soil health samples, which include soil organic matter. So we might be able to very quickly or in a short-term snapshot see if there's any changes in soil organic matter. My guess is in the long run, we would be increasing organic matter simply because, well, yes, we would be harvesting off the grain, but the small grain straw would still be in the field, right? And so that's going to be a mulch layer. That's going to be organic matter that potentially gets added in or incorporated into the soil there. So I think there is the potential to increase organic matter of the soil in these relay crop systems. Similarly, I think we should be able to improve like aggregate stability, microbial populations, maybe even infiltration rates, in the short term, as well as some other maybe more long-term soil health indicators as well.
So a couple people are asking of you've harvested your small grain, whether it's wheat or cereal rye, then what do you do with it? Have our farmers been able to sell them, or have they just been using it for feeding livestock? I know at least one, right, is collecting it then to use as like cover crop seed and different things like that. So how are people able to make this work economically for them?
Yeah, so I think in broad strokes, right? I think the majority, that are doing relay intercropping are thinking about it from the standpoint of producing some cover crop seed. We do have a couple situations where I don't think they're any of our farmer partners, but I know a couple of people that are doing it, and they are using it for, they're incorporating it into their livestock feed. So there are some different scenarios that come into play, and it's just a matter of how many acres, what are the yield levels, what's the market for that cover crop seed. I don't know of anyone that's really selling small grains to fit into a feed ration. They might, if they have the livestock on their farm, they might do that as an opportunity to pull back a little bit on the corn portion of that feed ration. But I don't know anyone that's selling small grains to go into feed rations, at a feed mill or something like that.
One person is asking about soil type. So, has any of this work been done on like sandy loam or loamy sand soils, or has it been mostly like a clay loam? Any big differences between our soil types?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm just looking at the kind of the locations where we've had these trials. They're all going to be pretty much silty clay loams or silty loams. Um, yeah, even over at the Gilmore City site, it would kind of fit that bill. I don't know of any of these that are on sandy soils. Oh, maybe one exception would be, I think it's the Northwood location that we had. There's gravel.
It's right by a quarry. Yes,
It's
the
right by a
soil
quarry, so
probes
there's
physically
gravel not
cannot,
too far down.
yeah, soil probes cannot do a 3 foot depth measurement. So
Yeah.
I've
Yep.
been there sampling those fields. You hit gravel pretty quick.
Yep.
One person is asking, so how are things looking for this season in 2026? Have people been able to get into harvest their rye? Because I know last season it was tough with the weather and things like that. But so how is 2026 shaping out?
That would be a great question for Liz or maybe even you, Elena, or Mitch
Yeah.
would know that one. I just haven't. I've been absent-minded a lot this summer for various reasons, and so I haven't kept up quite yet on where we're at as far as our 2026 harvest of that small grain. Um, yeah.
Yes.
So sorry, I
Okay.
can't answer that one.
No, you're good. And I also don't know off the top of my head. I can look real quick to see if I can find some and I'll look for it. A different person was asking um about comparing relay soybean yield results with like double crop soybean in Iowa. How are those yield results comparing?
Oh, that's a good question. We don't have, so to speak, much data on double crop soybeans. The only thing I can maybe attribute back or go back to is just thinking about when we do planting date studies on soybeans. And once we start planting in that first week of July, typically where we're going to be planting, so to speak, with a double crop system, those yield levels on soybeans are going to be fairly low, like maybe in the order of like 60% yield potential, that area. Now, there are years where we get, a long fall, we get plenty of moisture in July and August, where we can have maybe 80 to 85% yield potential on really late planted soybeans, right? And so, yeah, that's a good question. Maybe also a good time to put a plug in or a mention in for at Crawfordsville this year. I do have wheat that was harvested. We have some different wheat treatments harvested the last week of June into the first week of July with soybeans planted following them as a true double crop. And so I will have some data come this fall. My wheat yields, um, I would say where we tried to harvest that wheat either wetter or use a desiccant, my wheat yields were down just a little bit from when we kind of just let them normally mature and harvest them at normal time frame. But it's not a huge penalty for harvesting them a week to 10 days earlier. Just a little penalty, but have to wait several more weeks here before we get to soybean harvest to know what that looks like.
Yeah. All right. And then I just wanted to real quick, rye harvest was able to be completed at all of the sites this year, which is exciting because as you mentioned earlier, in 2025, it was only completed at two of these sites that you're seeing on your screen right now. So we'll definitely have full rye results for 2026. And so we'll just wait to get those results processed, but harvest was able to be done. Otherwise, in interest of time, we'll go ahead and wrap up here. So, thank you, Mark, for presenting today. I know a lot of people seem they're interested in relay intercropping, so I urge you to check out any of our previous webinars and our website, iowalearningfarms.org/relay-intercropping. And yeah, join us next week for When Does Scouting Pay? Evaluating soybean aphid scouting and drones. Otherwise, Mark, if you've got any last words, I'll let you have the floor.
Yeah, this was a fun project because, we're really struggling in Iowa to get cover crops on. And so thinking about, how can we make, the small grain more than just a cover crop and get a cash crop yield out of it. I think there are some ways, but they come with risk. They come with additional management. And so there are trade-offs, but I think, again, depending on the farm operation, there could be some value there too.
Perfect. All right. And with that, thanks everyone.